The bull refused to leave the soldier's grave, guarding it day after day, until the soldier's son arrived. What happens next will leave you speechless. The first shovelful of dirt had hardly fallen onto the wooden casket before the sound of heavy hooves shook the ground. Ironhide stood at the edge of the grave, nostrils flaring, muscles tense, his dark coat glistening in the dim light of the overcast afternoon. The bull refused to move even as the mourners gasped and pulled back. Some whispered in fear, others bowed their heads as though recognizing something sacred. The priest hesitated mid-prayer, glancing nervously at the towering animal, but no one dared approach. And when the final words were spoken and the grave was filled, Ironhide remained, lowering his head toward the mound of earth with a guttural snort that echoed like grief itself. By the following morning, the bull still had not moved. He stood at the grave's edge, his body planted firmly in the soil, as though guarding the resting place of Captain Elias Rowan. Townsfolk gathered at a distance, their hushed voices carrying through the cemetery. Farmers muttered about curses, about omens that should not be ignored. Old veterans, men who had once served with Elias, removed their hats and gave a quiet salute each time they passed, their faces carved with respect and sorrow. Children clutched their father's hands, eyes wide with awe, unable to look away from the animal's unbroken vigil. 3 days passed, and still Ironhide refused food or water. A group of men tried to drive him out, throwing ropes around his thick neck, but the bull planted his hooves deep and lashed out, nearly trampling them. The ropes snapped, and the men retreated with bruises and shame. "It isn't natural," one of them spat, pressing his hand against a fresh scrape on his arm. "Beast's gone mad." Yet even he kept his distance afterward, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of retribution. By the 6th day, Adrian Rowan arrived in Harrowfield. He had traveled through the night, dust clinging to his boots, his eyes heavy from the road. The news of his father's death had reached him late, carried by a distant cousin's letter. Though he had expected the grave to be fresh, he had not expected the crowd gathered there, or the sight of the great bull standing motionless beside it. Adrian stopped at the gate of the cemetery, his breath catching in his chest. Ironhide was larger than he remembered, his body looming like a shadow against the morning sky, eyes glowing with something unreadable. "What in the world?" Adrian muttered under his breath, his voice breaking the silence. The cemetery keeper, Mr. Harland, approached with slow steps. The old man's face was lined with exhaustion, his clothes smudged with dirt from tending graves. He pulled his cap from his head and wiped his brow before speaking. "You must be Elias's boy. Thought you'd come sooner." His tone carried no judgment, only weariness. He pointed toward the bull. "That creature hasn't left since the captain was buried. Won't eat, won't drink. Anyone who tries to move him gets near killed. The folk are restless, lad. They want him gone." Adrian's jaw tightened. He had known of his father's bull, of course, though in truth he had never cared for the beast. To him, it had always been a symbol of the distance between him and Elias. A beast his father would train, talk to, and spend hours with, while Adrian himself was left with silence. Now, seeing Ironhide guarding the grave, Adrian felt the old bitterness return, mingled with something else he could not name. "Why me?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on the bull. "Because," Harlan said, lowering his voice, "he only looks at you." Adrian turned sharply, confused, but before he could respond, Ironhide's head rose. The bull's gaze locked on him, unblinking, steady. The air seemed to thicken under the weight of it. Adrian's heart pounded, his instincts urging him to step back, yet he stood rooted to the spot. Ironhide did not snort or paw the ground as he had with others. He simply stared as though waiting. "Go on, lad," Harland whispered, nodding toward the grave. "See what he does." Slowly, cautiously, Adrian moved forward. The murmurs of the townsfolk grew louder, their eyes following every step. He could feel their anticipation pressing against his back. As he neared the mound of earth, Ironhide lowered his massive head, the muscles in his neck rippling with the motion. Adrian stopped just a few feet away, gripping the strap of his satchel to steady his trembling hands. "I'm not here for you," Adrian muttered under his breath, though whether he spoke to the bull or the grave itself, he wasn't sure. His voice was heavy, the words thick with the resentment he had carried for years. Elias had been a father in name only, distant and cold, leaving Adrian to grow up under the shadow of a man who always seemed to belong more to the battlefield than to his own home. But Ironhide's eyes did not waver. They glimmered with something that unsettled Adrian, recognition, almost expectation. The bull let out a deep, resonant snort and scraped the ground with his hoof, sending a tremor through the soil. Adrian's throat tightened. Memories of his father's stern face and clipped words surfaced unbidden. Elias had always been a man of secrets, speaking in fragments, never revealing the full truth of what weighed on him. Standing before the grave now, with Ironhide watching him, Adrian felt that those secrets were still alive, buried beneath the earth, pressing against him like an unfinished sentence. Behind him, Harlan cleared his throat. "What will you do?" Adrian didn't answer right away. He crouched near the grave, pressing his hand against the cold stone marker. The name etched into it blurred for a moment as his eyes stung, though he blinked the tears away before they could fall. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice low. His words meant more for himself than anyone else. The bull shifted closer, the sound of his hooves striking the dirt like a drumbeat. Adrian flinched at the movement but held his ground. For a heartbeat, the air seemed to still, and then Ironhide bent his massive head, resting his muzzle near the grave. The gesture was so deliberate, so purposeful, that it left Adrian breathless. The crowd behind him fell into silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Adrian's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the strange pull that had taken root in his chest since he first laid eyes on the bull. He wanted to walk away, to let the animal keep its vigil and wash his hands of his father's memory. But something in Ironhide's gaze anchored him, a silent demand that he could neither explain nor refuse. When Adrian finally straightened, his face pale but his voice steady, he whispered to himself, almost against his own will, "There's more here than anyone understands." Ironhide's eyes flickered, and in that gaze, Adrian felt the first threads of a bond he had not expected, a connection that seemed to stretch beyond life and death. It was then he realized that his father had left behind not just a grave to mourn, but a message still waiting to be uncovered. And in that moment, as Ironhide's steady stare bore into him, Adrian felt a chill run through his veins, a whisper of something greater than grief, heavier than loyalty, and sharper than truth. It was in that gaze Adrian felt a pull, a sense that his father had left behind not just memories, but a hidden message that only he was meant to uncover. Adrian stood at the edge of the graveyard path, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil as the morning mist curled low across the stones. Ironhide was there, exactly where he had been the day before, head lowered, massive body planted firmly beside his father's grave. The bull's breath rose in heavy clouds, a soundless rhythm that matched the silence around him. Adrian gripped the wooden gatepost, unable to pull his eyes away. This was no accident, no simple loyalty. Every time he returned, Ironhide's dark gaze found him, steady and deliberate, as though measuring him. The cemetery keeper, Mr. Harland, shuffled up beside him, his old hands clutching his cap. "It can't go on like this," the man muttered, his eyes weary. "Graves are being trampled. Folk are afraid to come near. The town's patience is running out." His tone was not unkind, but there was a sharp edge beneath the weariness. "If you don't act, they'll act for you. And I don't think you'll like their solution." Adrian's jaw tightened. He could still hear the whispers from the tavern the night before, men muttering about shotguns and ropes, their voices half in fear and half in anger. "You mean they'll kill him?" Adrian said flatly, his hand tightening around the wood until his knuckles went white. Harlan gave a slow, heavy nod. "Some believe he's dangerous. Others? Well, they think there's something unnatural about him guarding that grave." He hesitated before adding, "Truth be told, lad, I don't know what to think anymore." Adrian swallowed hard, his eyes drifting back to the bull. Dangerous? Perhaps. But he had seen danger in men's eyes before. He had seen it in his father's, cold and unreadable. Ironhide's gaze was different. It was watchful, yes, but not cruel, almost expectant. The memory of their silent encounter on the first day clung to him, refusing to fade. "Leave him be," Adrian said, his voice firmer now. "He isn't just standing there for nothing. My father meant something by this, I know it." Harland raised a brow. "You sound sure, more sure than you did yesterday." Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he stepped through the gate, the crunch of gravel loud in the stillness. Ironhide lifted his head, ears twitching, but made no move to charge. The bull's eyes locked on Adrian with that same uncanny intensity. A strange calm washed over him as he walked closer, though his heart still pounded hard. He stopped only a few paces away from the grave, close enough to smell the earth and the faint musk of the animal. "Why?" Adrian whispered under his breath, his voice cracking. "What are you guarding?" The bull snorted softly, lowering his head as if in acknowledgement. That night, back at Elias Rowan's old home, Adrian searched through the dusty shelves and worn trunks his father had left behind. He had avoided this house for years, unwilling to face the silence of its rooms, but now necessity outweighed bitterness. Candlelight flickered across faded maps, military medals, and weathered books. At the bottom of one trunk, beneath a layer of folded uniforms, he found them, leather-bound journals, the ink smudged with time but still legible. Hours slipped by as he read, the room filling with the smell of wax and parchment. The entries were not simple accounts of war. They were riddles, fragments of conversations, coded phrases only a soldier might understand. Again and again, certain words returned. Burdens carried beyond the war, watchers in silence, trust bound in strength. And always, always, there was Ironhide. Elias wrote of him not as an animal, but as a keeper, a sentinel of something larger. Adrian sat back, rubbing his eyes, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. His father had always been a man of walls and secrets, a man who seemed to carry more than his own life on his shoulders. But why tie that burden to a bull? Why leave him to guard a grave? The answer eluded him, but the feeling grew stronger. Ironhide was not lingering out of grief. He was protecting something. The next evening, as Adrian walked the familiar path back to the cemetery, he noticed movement in the shadows near the grave. His pace quickened, and the mist curled around him as he reached the clearing. A group of men stood there, their lanterns casting long, crooked shadows across the stones. They weren't mourners. Their stances were tense, their whispers sharp. At their center stood Marcus Vale, a man Adrian knew too well from childhood. Marcus was taller now, his frame lean but hardened by years of work. His face carried the sharpness of ambition, his eyes cold with resentment. He smirked when he saw Adrian, lifting his lantern higher. "So the prodigal son returns," Marcus drawled. "I wondered how long it would take before you showed up." Adrian's fists clenched. "What are you doing here?" Marcus gestured toward the bull, who stood rigid by the grave, snorting softly. "That beast doesn't stand guard without reason. Your father was many things, Rowan, but simple wasn't one of them. He hid something, and now it's mine for the taking." Adrian stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "You have no claim here." Marcus laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. "Don't I? Your father and mine fought over this land for years. He dies, and suddenly there's a mystery, a bull that won't budge, whispers of secrets. You think I don't see the pattern? Whatever he left behind, it belongs to me now." His men chuckled darkly, shifting their grips on the lanterns and spades they carried. Ironhide stamped the ground, his body tense. The sound reverberated through the clearing, silencing the laughter. Adrian held his ground, but unease gnawed at him. Marcus's words were poison, but they burrowed deep. What if he was right? What if Elias had left behind more than memories, more than journals? What if Ironhide truly was guarding something of value? "Leave," Adrian said firmly, though his voice betrayed a tremor. "This grave isn't yours to disturb." Marcus's smile thinned, his eyes narrowing. "Then watch carefully, Rowan. Because sooner or later, you'll see I was right." With that he turned, his men following, their lanterns bobbing like restless spirits as they vanished into the mist. Adrian stood frozen, his breath sharp in the cold air. When he turned back to Ironhide, the bull's eyes were waiting for him, unblinking, patient. The weight of that stare pressed harder than ever, and for the first time, Adrian felt afraid, not of the bull, but of what lay buried beneath his father's silence. He returned to the house that night with Marcus's words burning in his mind. Sitting by the flickering candlelight, Adrian reopened his father's journals, reading every line with fresh urgency. The fragments no longer felt like riddles. They felt like warnings. Hidden within were paths, symbols, notes about places only a soldier would recognize. Each line whispered of a legacy wrapped in secrecy, a truth Elias had chosen not to speak but to hide. Adrian closed the book slowly, his hand trembling as he rested it on the worn leather cover. Marcus had been wrong about one thing. It wasn't greed that tied Elias to Ironhide. It was trust. But the greater question remained, and it echoed in Adrian's mind long after the candle burned out. Could it be that Elias left behind more than memories? Driven by equal parts anger and curiosity, Adrian began piecing together his father's notes, each line pointing to a legacy wrapped in secrecy. But the greater question was whether Adrian was prepared to face the truth and the danger that came with it. Marcus Vale's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Drive it away!" he shouted, his face flushed with determination as he thrust his arm forward. The hired men surged ahead, their ropes coiling, their shouts sharp, trying to force Ironhide from the grave. The bull's massive body bristled with tension, hooves digging deep into the damp soil as though rooting himself into the earth. The townspeople had gathered at the edges of the graveyard, their murmurs weaving with the wind. Some gasped at the audacity of the attack, others muttered prayers under their breath. Mothers clutched their sons close, while older men shook their heads in disbelief, knowing such defiance would only provoke the animal's fury. Ironhide lowered his head, nostrils flaring, and when the first whip cracked against his flank, he bellowed with such force that the crowd staggered backward. Then he charged. The ground quaked beneath his hooves as he barreled forward, scattering the intruders like dry leaves. One man screamed as he was tossed high into the air before crashing against the stone wall with a sickening thud. The crowd erupted in cries, some in horror, others in awe. Marcus stumbled back, his confident smirk replaced with fear, though pride forced him to shout over the chaos. "Hold the lines! Don't let the beast win!" But his words faltered as his men scattered, their ropes slipping from trembling hands. Adrian, standing only a few paces away from his father's grave, felt his heart hammering in his chest. Ironhide stood like a sentinel once more, sides heaving, eyes blazing with defiance. The wounded man groaned against the wall, and the others rushed to drag him away, none daring to step back toward the bull. Marcus's humiliation showed in the tight set of his jaw, the way his eyes darted toward the watching crowd. He could feel their judgment, their whispers cutting into his pride. With a bitter glare at Adrian, he spat out his vow. "This isn't over, Rowan. Mark my words, I'll have what's mine." He turned sharply, gathering his men, and stormed out of the graveyard under the weight of his own disgrace. The crowd dispersed slowly, their voices a low storm of speculation. Adrian remained, staring at Ironhide, whose broad frame shielded Elias Rowan's grave like an unmovable wall. The young man understood then that this vigil was not something he could step aside from. Marcus would return, and next time he would not come half-prepared. That night, by the dim glow of a single candle in his father's house, Adrian pored over the journals again. Each entry seemed clearer now, as though the chaos of the day had burned away the fog clouding his thoughts. The words spoke of betrayal among officers, deals struck in darkness, and men left to die because others sought profit. His father's hand had scrawled phrases like, "Truth must be guarded, and loyalty lies not in men, but in what remains buried." Adrian traced the faded ink with his finger. A chest. The notes repeated its mention in different forms. A sealed chest of documents, proof of corruption. The puzzle pieces aligned with painful clarity. Elias had not only fought a war of soldiers, he had fought a war of silence afterward, hiding evidence that could ruin powerful men. Adrian leaned back, his breath heavy. The grave, the bull, the endless vigil. It all led to one truth. The chest was buried beneath the very ground his father now rested under. And Ironhide was not merely mourning, he was guarding. The thought chilled him, not because of the secret itself, but because Marcus must have suspected the same. If Adrian had seen it in the writings, Marcus would see it too, or worse, already knew. The following night, the moon hung low and pale over the graveyard as Adrian returned, shovel in hand. The silence was broken only by the rustle of leaves and Ironhide's steady breathing. The bull stepped closer, his massive head lowering as if granting passage. Adrian's throat tightened at the gesture. "I don't know what I'm about to find," he whispered, pressing his hand to the rough wood of the shovel. "But if my father trusted you with it, then I'll carry that trust too." The ground was firm, but Adrian dug relentlessly, the sound of the spade biting into soil echoing in the stillness. Sweat ran down his brow, his muscles aching, but he did not stop. Hours slipped by, each strike of the shovel sinking him deeper into the earth and into his father's secret. Finally, with a dull clang, the blade struck something solid. Adrian dropped to his knees, clawing away the dirt until his hands brushed against wood bound with rusted metal. A chest. His breath caught as his fingers traced the insignia burned into the lid, his father's mark, unmistakable. Adrian lifted it slowly, the weight of it heavy, both in mass and in meaning. He felt the gravity of his father's silence pressing on him, the truth sealed away for years. But before he could pry it open, the sound of footsteps cut through the night. Lanterns flared at the edge of the graveyard, casting sharp beams of light across the stones. Marcus Vale stepped forward, his smirk restored, his men surrounding him like wolves circling prey. "I knew you'd come," Marcus said smoothly, his voice dripping with false triumph. "And I knew you'd find it. You always were the obedient son, digging where your father told you, chasing shadows. But that," he pointed toward the chest in Adrian's arms, "that belongs to me now." Adrian's chest tightened, his pulse racing. "This is my father's legacy," he shot back, clutching the chest close. "He died to protect it." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his smile twisting cruelly. "No, Rowan, he died hiding it, and hiding is over. Hand it to me, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Ironhide pawed the ground, his massive head swinging low, nostrils flaring in warning. The men shifted nervously, gripping their lanterns and clubs tighter. Adrian's voice rose, steadier now, as he met Marcus's gaze. "You'll never have it. Not while I breathe." For a tense heartbeat, silence held the graveyard, the air thick with anticipation. Then, with a roar that shook the night, Ironhide charged. The men scattered, their shouts breaking into cries of panic as the bull tore through their ranks. Lanterns fell, flames sputtering out in the dirt. Marcus stumbled back, cursing, as his men fled in every direction. Adrian clutched the chest to his chest, his heart hammering as he darted toward the shadows, Ironhide clearing the path with unstoppable force. The ground thundered with the bull's hooves, each strike scattering Marcus's plans into chaos. Behind him, Marcus's voice rang out, broken with rage. "This isn't the end, Rowan. You hear me? I'll take what's mine, no matter what it costs." But Adrian didn't stop. He ran into the darkness with the chest heavy in his arms, Ironhide's presence steady beside him. The night had given him proof beyond doubt. The bull's loyalty was unshakable, the secret real, and Marcus's greed relentless. The fight was far from over. Marcus would not let this humiliation go unanswered. Adrian placed the chest carefully on the oak table before Colonel Thorne, the hinges groaning as he set it down. The dim lamplight flickered across the aged veteran's lined face, shadows clinging to every crease carved by years of war. Thorne's hands trembled as he undid the rusted clasps, the weight of anticipation heavy in the air. Adrian stood in silence, his breath shallow, his heart still echoing the chaos of the graveyard. Ironhide remained just outside the cabin, a hulking silhouette framed by the window, his steady presence both reassuring and ominous. The lid creaked open, revealing stacks of letters, weathered reports, and bundles of sworn testimonies bound in string. Thorne reached for one with delicate care, as though afraid it might crumble into dust. His eyes scanned the faded ink, and almost immediately tears welled. His voice broke as he whispered, "Elias, you carried this alone." He set the paper down with reverence, wiping his face with a calloused hand. "All these years we thought you'd turned away, that the silence meant guilt. And all along, you were shielding us, shielding me, from the very men who sought to silence you." Adrian's throat tightened. The words pierced him deeper than he expected. His father had borne this secret for decades, never once sharing the truth even with his only son. Now, with every page, every name revealed in the documents, the hidden burden Elias carried came to light. Thorne straightened, his voice gaining strength though his shoulders sagged beneath the truth. "These aren't just letters. These are confessions, records of men who sold their brothers in arms for coin, who sent them to die so their pockets could swell. High-ranking officers, names that will shake Harrowfield and beyond. The moment this is revealed, trials will begin. Some will fall, and justice will finally be spoken." Adrian nodded, but a hollow ache gnawed at him. "And what of my father?" His voice wavered, though his eyes burned with resolve. "He bore the scorn of the town. He let me believe he was less than what he truly was. He never told me." Thorne met his gaze, grief etched deep into his expression. "He could not tell you, Adrian. The danger was too great. If the knowledge had spread, they would have come for you both. He chose silence, believing that one day the truth would surface." The young man clenched his fists, torn between pride and sorrow. His father's honor had been restored, yet it came at the cost of a lifetime of distance between them. The silence that once felt like abandonment now revealed itself as sacrifice. The news spread quickly. Within days, whispers rippled through Harrowfield's narrow streets. Names of officers echoed in council halls, trials were convened, and dismissals shook the upper ranks of the military. For the Rowan name, long shadowed by suspicion, light had finally broken through. The townspeople, once hesitant to even utter Elias's name without scorn, now spoke of him with respect. Adrian was greeted not with wary glances, but with nods of recognition, gratitude even. Yet the honor did little to ease his heart. At his father's grave, Adrian stood in the hush of the morning. The carved stone was simple, but the air around it carried a weight that words could not capture. He placed a hand against the cold surface, speaking softly. "You should have told me. You should have trusted me. But I see it now. You carried what you had to, and maybe you couldn't share it then. But you've spoken to me now, through him." His eyes drifted to Ironhide, who stood vigilant just as he had for weeks, unflinching in his watch. The silence between father and son seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet understanding. But the change came suddenly. One morning, Adrian arrived at the graveyard as he had every dawn, only to find the ground bare. Ironhide was gone. Panic clenched him until he heard a familiar sound behind him, the deep, steady rhythm of hooves. He turned, and there the bull was, striding out of the mist not toward the grave but toward Adrian himself. Ironhide halted only when he was at his side, lowering his great head as if in submission, as though acknowledging a shift. Adrian reached out, his hand resting on the beast's coarse hide. "You're leaving it behind," he murmured, realization dawning. The vigil was over. The duty had changed. Ironhide had chosen to follow him now, no longer bound to Elias's grave but tethered instead to Elias's son. The townspeople whispered of it almost immediately. Men at the tavern spoke of the bond passing from father to son. Others called it fate, saying the beast had recognized its new master. But for Adrian, the truth was simpler and heavier. He was no longer alone. Ironhide's loyalty was not a gift but a reminder that Elias's trust had not ended with death, but lived on in him. And yet, as peace began to return, shadows stirred again. Days later, in the quiet of Thorne's cabin, Adrian sat with the chest once more, sorting through its contents. At the bottom, hidden beneath stacks of damning reports, lay a single envelope sealed with his father's mark. His breath caught as he slid a finger beneath the brittle wax, unfolding the paper within. The words were written in Elias's familiar hand, steady and resolute even in their finality. To my son, Adrian. If you are reading this, it means the truth has surfaced, and my silence has ended. But know this, you must not believe the fight is over. Marcus Vale is not your true enemy. The men I defied, those I exposed, will come for what remains hidden. Protect Ironhide, and above all, protect yourself. You must finish what I could not. Adrian's hand trembled as he read the lines again and again, his father's voice echoing in the ink. Fear threaded through his resolve. If Marcus was merely a pawn, then greater powers still moved in the shadows, men more dangerous than he had imagined. The thought of them knowing his name, of them seeking what Elias had shielded for so long, sent a chill coursing through him. He folded the letter with care, pressing it against his chest as though it could bring him closer to his father's spirit. Outside, Ironhide stood in the fading light, silent and immovable, his presence as steady as the earth itself. Adrian stepped to the door, gazing at the bull, then at the dark horizon stretching beyond Harrowfield. The burden had shifted once more, heavier than before. His father's battle had ended, but his own had just begun. And as Ironhide stood by his side, silent and unyielding, Adrian knew the fight for his father's legacy was far from over. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of loyalty, grief, and the profound bonds that can exist between humans and animals. This narrative aims to highlight the deep emotional connections that endure even after death, inspiring empathy and a deeper appreciation for the unspoken devotion found in all creatures.